Part 2, the coffee date. As I pulled up to Officer Hayden's house, my heart was racing faster than my car had been when he first pulled me over. The modest brick home with its well-kept garden looked welcoming, but my nerves were still getting the better of me. I checked my reflection one last time in the rearview mirror, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the warm afternoon sun. This was either going to be the best decision I'd ever made or the most awkward coffee date in history. My hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline coursing through me making it hard to steady them. I double-checked each digit, my mind racing with 1,000 possible outcomes. What if he didn't answer? What if he did? What if this was all some elaborate prank and I was about to make a complete fool of myself? But then, almost without realizing it, I pressed call. The ringing filled the silence, each tone dragging out longer than the last. My heart was in my throat, my breath shallow as I waited for him to pick up. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe a quick voicemail, or even worse, an awkward conversation where he didn't remember me at all. But then the ringing stopped. Hello! His voice was warm, smoother than I remembered, and it sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment, I couldn't speak, my mind completely blank, every word I'd rehearsed disappearing like smoke in the wind. Hi. I finally managed, my voice cracking slightly. Is this Officer Hayden? There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the faintest hint of a smile in his voice when he responded. It is. Who's this? It's me. The guy you pulled over earlier today, I said, cringing at how awkward I sounded. You left your number on the ticket, and I wasn't sure if you meant to, but I figured I'd call and find out. His laugh was soft, almost musical, and it sent a wave of relief through me. I was wondering if you'd actually call, he said, his tone teasing but kind. I don't usually do things like that, you know? Really? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. So why me? There was another pause, this one longer than the last, and I could hear him take a deep breath before he spoke. You seem different, he said finally, his voice quieter now. I don't know what it was, but something about you made me want to take a chance. His words hit me like a jolt, and I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my lips. Well, I said, my confidence growing slightly, I guess I'm glad I didn't throw the ticket away. His laugh came again, light and easy, and for the first time all night, I felt myself relax. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't just my imagination. This was real. The silence on the other end of the line stretched just long enough to make my pulse quicken again. I was trying to think of something clever to say, something that wouldn't make me sound like the nervous wreck I felt inside. But then he spoke, his voice steady and warm, and it grounded me immediately. So, he said, his tone light but curious, what were you thinking about when you decided to call? I let out a nervous laugh, rubbing the back of my neck as I tried to find the right words. Honestly, I was thinking this could either be the best decision I've made all day or the most embarrassing. And which is it so far? He asked, the teasing lilt in his voice making me smile. Definitely leaning toward the best, I said, surprising myself with the honesty of my answer. It wasn't like me to be this open with someone I barely knew, but there was something about him that made it feel easy, natural even. Good, he said simply, and I could almost hear his smile through the phone. I wouldn't have left my number if I didn't want to hear from you. That's reassuring, I replied, the tension in my chest easing just a little. I was half convinced it was some sort of elaborate joke, or I don't know, maybe even a test. A test? He repeated, sounding amused. What kind of test? You know? I said, laughing at how ridiculous it sounded now that I was saying it out loud. Like, let's see if this guy's brave or dumb enough to actually call. His laugh was soft but genuine, and it sent a warm flush through me. If it were a test, he said, I'd say you passed. There was a beat of silence after that. Not uncomfortable, but charged with something I couldn't quite place. I could hear the faint sounds of his surroundings through the line. The rustle of papers maybe, or the hum of a distant fan. It grounded the conversation in reality, reminded me that this wasn't some daydream I'd conjured up to escape the monotony of my evening. So, I ventured after a moment. Is it weird if I ask why you left your number in the first place? I mean, not that I'm complaining, but it's not exactly standard operating procedure for a traffic stop. Is it? No, he admitted, his tone light but sincere. It's definitely not something I've ever done before, but you caught my attention. I felt my stomach flip at his words, a mix of disbelief and exhilaration washing over me. Caught your attention how? I asked, genuinely curious now. You seemed genuine, he said, as if he were choosing his words carefully. Most people I pull over are either angry, defensive, or just completely uninterested in anything I have to say. But you, I don't know, you didn't feel like you were putting on a front. Well, I was definitely caught off guard, I said, chuckling softly. But I guess that's better than coming off as angry or defensive, right? Much better, he agreed, his voice carrying that same warmth that had struck me earlier. It made me want to take a chance. And here we are, I echoed, the weight of the moment settling over me. It felt surreal, this connection that had sprung out of something as mundane as a speeding ticket, but it also felt right in a way I couldn't quite explain. So, he said after a moment, his tone shifting slightly, what's next? The question caught me off guard, and I scrambled to come up with an answer that didn't sound completely clueless. Well, I began, stalling for time as I tried to think. I guess that depends on you. Do you want to meet up? Just the two of us? Just the two of us? He repeated, and I couldn't tell if he was teasing or just thinking it over. That sounds promising. I laughed, the sound more nervous than I'd intended. Too promising? Maybe a little, he said, his voice carrying a hint of mischief now. But it's a start. Okay then, I said, leaning into the light-hearted tone of the conversation. We'll start at your place, and if that goes well, maybe I'll come up with something more adventurous for next time. Next time, huh? He said, and I could hear the smile in his voice again. Confident, aren't you? Not at all, I admitted, laughing at my own expense. But I'm willing to take the risk. He let out a soft laugh, and the sound was enough to make my heart skip a beat. All right, he said finally. When are you free? Whenever you are, I said, trying not to sound too eager. I'll make it work. Tomorrow? He suggested, his tone casual but with an inviting edge. Tomorrow works, I said quickly, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. Where should I meet you? My place, he replied, his voice steady but warm. It's more private, and I make a pretty good cup of coffee. Okay, I said, my pulse quickening at the thought. What time? Noon, he said, his tone light but decisive. I'll send you the address. Noon it is, I replied, barely able to keep the grin off my face. I'll see you there. Looking forward to it, he said softly, and then there was a brief pause before he added, Good night. Good night, officer, I said. He laughed low and easy. I like how that sounds, he said, and then the line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, the phone still in my hand as the weight of the conversation settled over me. Tomorrow. I was going to his place tomorrow. The thought sent a rush of nerves and excitement through me, and I couldn't help but wonder what the day would bring. The next morning was a blur of restless energy and nervous anticipation. I woke up earlier than usual, the sunlight filtering through my blinds feeling brighter, sharper. My thoughts were tethered to Cole, to his voice on the phone last night, to the way he'd said, looking forward to it. The memory of those words replayed over and over in my mind like a mantra, each repetition sending a fresh jolt of anticipation through me. It wasn't just coffee, or at least that was what I kept telling myself, but it wasn't, was it? Not anymore. The idea of sitting with him, just the two of us, carried an undercurrent of something bigger, something that felt equal parts thrilling and terrifying. Around mid-morning, as I sat nursing my third cup of coffee in an attempt to quell my nervous energy, my phone buzzed on the counter. I grabbed it instinctively, my heart racing as I saw his name flash on the screen. Morning, the text read. Let me know when you're on your way and I'll send over the gate code. For a moment, I just stared at the message, a small nervous smile tugging at the corners of my lips. This was happening. There was no backing out now. My fingers moved across the screen almost without thinking as I typed back, "Will do. Looking forward to it." His reply came almost instantly, and I couldn't help but smile as I read, "Me too." I read the message twice, the words settling over me like a warm blanket. There was something intimate about it, inviting me into his space, sharing something as simple and personal as coffee in his own home. It wasn't what I'd expected, but it felt right. The next hour was a blur of preparation. I showered, changed clothes 3 times before settling on something that felt casual but not careless, and spent far too long debating whether to bring anything. Flowers? Too much. A bottle of wine? Way too much. I eventually settled on nothing, figuring it was safer to keep things simple. By the time I was pulling into his driveway, my nerves were back in full force. His house was modest but inviting. A neat little brick home with a small garden out front. The blinds on the windows were partially drawn, but I could see the faint glow of sunlight streaming through them. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, my fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. This was it, no turning back now. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my phone, shot him a quick, "I'm here" text, and stepped out of the car. The front door opened just as I reached the porch, and there he was, standing in the doorway with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. He was dressed casually in jeans and a fitted sweater, his hair slightly tousled as if he hadn't spent too much time fussing over it. The look suited him, made him seem even more grounded, more real. "Hey," he said, his voice warm and welcoming as he stepped aside to let me in. "Hey," I echoed, my voice sounding steadier than I felt as I crossed the threshold. His house was cozy, the kind of space that felt lived in but not cluttered. A soft gray couch sat in the living room, flanked by bookshelves filled with paperbacks and framed photos. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, mingling with the subtle scent of cedarwood from a nearby candle. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, gesturing toward the couch. "I'll grab the coffee." I nodded, sitting down on the edge of the couch and trying to ignore the fluttering in my chest. From the kitchen, I could hear the soft clink of mugs and the sound of coffee being poured. "You've got a nice place?" I called out, hoping to fill the silence. "Thanks," he replied, his voice carrying over the sounds of his movements. "It's nothing fancy, but it works for me." A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, a mug in each hand. He handed one to me before sitting down on the opposite end of the couch, tucking one leg beneath him as he settled in. For a while, we just sat there, the warmth of the coffee and the quiet intimacy of the moment wrapping around us like a cocoon. I could feel his eyes on me every so often, but he didn't say anything, didn't rush to fill the silence. "So," he said finally, his tone light but curious, "did you think I was crazy when I left my number on that ticket?" The question caught me off guard, but I couldn't help but laugh at the memory. "Honestly? Yeah, a little. I wasn't sure if it was real at first." "And now?" he asked, tilting his head slightly as he studied me. "Now I'm glad I called," I said simply, my voice carrying a sincerity that surprised even me. His lips curved into a small smile, and for a moment, the air between us felt impossibly heavy, charged with something unspoken. I wanted to say more, to find the words to explain what this moment felt like, but I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, lost in the quiet pull of his presence. The tension between us lingered in the air, stretching out like a thread that neither of us dared to break. Cole's smile remained soft and knowing, as though he could read the unspoken thoughts racing through my mind. I sipped my coffee, the warmth settling in my chest, but it wasn't the drink that had my pulse quickening. It was him. "So," he said, breaking the silence, his tone playful but with an undercurrent of something deeper. "Are you going to keep staring at me? Or are you actually going to tell me what you're thinking?" I hesitated, caught off guard by his directness. The truth danced on the tip of my tongue, but voicing it felt like stepping off a ledge. "I'm thinking that this feels surreal," I admitted finally, my voice quieter than I intended. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Surreal how?" "Just everything about this. I don't know if I expected any of this to happen, but now that it has, I can't seem to stop thinking about it. His expression softened, and he leaned back against the armrest of the couch, cradling his mug in his hands. "You're not the only one," he murmured, his gaze dropping briefly before meeting mine again. The confession hung between us, unspoken feelings and thoughts weaving a delicate thread that tethered us together. My heart pounded, my breath catching as I watched him carefully set his mug down on the table. "Do you always do this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly as I gestured vaguely between us. "Leave your number on speeding tickets?" Cole's laugh was low and warm, sending a ripple of heat through me. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're the first." "Why?" He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes holding mine with unwavering intensity. "Because you intrigued me," he said softly. "Because when I pulled you over, there was something about you I couldn't ignore." I swallowed hard, his honesty unraveling the last remnants of my hesitation. I set my mug down beside his, shifting slightly closer to him on the couch. "And now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His lips parted, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. "Now," he murmured, his voice low and steady, "I'm still figuring that out." His hand brushed against mine, tentative but deliberate, and a shiver ran through me at the contact. Slowly, I turned my hand over, letting my fingers brush against his before lacing them together. The simple gesture felt like a spark igniting something bigger, something I couldn't contain even if I wanted to. His gaze flicked to our joined hands before meeting mine again, his expression charged with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "This is crazy," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice, only a quiet wonder that mirrored my own. "Maybe," I replied, my thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand, "but it doesn't feel wrong." He had a small, hesitant smile on his face, and for a moment, I thought he might pull away. Instead, he leaned in closer, his free hand coming to rest lightly on my arm. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it sent a wave of heat coursing through me. "Cole," I began, but the rest of my words dissolved as his lips brushed against mine. The kiss was tentative at first, a soft meeting of lips that carried more questions than answers. But as the seconds passed, it deepened, the gentle exploration giving way to something more urgent, more consuming. His hand moved to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. I let myself sink into the moment, my hands finding his waist and holding him gently. The world outside his cozy living room faded away, leaving only the quiet hum of my heartbeat and the warmth of his body against mine. When we finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in his expression that made my heart ache. "This isn't what I expected," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Me neither," I admitted, my hands still resting lightly on his waist. "But I don't want it to stop." He smiled and leaned in again, his kiss softer this time but no less potent. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding to my chest as he pressed closer. His touch was deliberate, confident, and I found myself responding instinctively, my arms wrapping around him as though I'd been waiting for this moment my entire life. He didn't pull away. His lips moved against mine with increasing urgency, his hands slipping from my chest to my shoulders as he settled more firmly into my lap. The weight of his body against mine felt grounding yet electric, as though every touch, every movement carried a spark that left me breathless. His fingers traced along my jawline, his touch feather-light yet purposeful. It was as if he wanted to memorize every part of me, and I felt myself responding in kind. My hands moved to his hips, holding him close while my lips pressed against his with a hunger I hadn't realized I'd been suppressing. The room seemed to grow warmer, the quiet hum of the fireplace fading into the background. All I could focus on was him, the way he kissed me, the way his hands explored with a mix of boldness and hesitation, the soft sigh that escaped his lips when I pulled him closer. "Cole," I murmured against his lips, my voice low and rough. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine. His cheeks were flushed, his breathing uneven, and I could see the flicker of uncertainty mingled with desire in his expression. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly, his fingers trailing down my chest. I cupped his face gently, my thumbs brushing against his cheeks. "I've never been more sure about anything," I replied, my voice steady. He moved again, his hands sliding down to the hem of my shirt. "Can I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, lifting my arms to help him as he pulled the fabric over my head and tossed it aside. His hands smoothed over my chest, his touch sending a shiver down my spine. He studied me for a moment, his gaze lingering in a way that made my skin flush. "You're something else," he murmured, more to himself than to me. I couldn't help but laugh softly, the sound breaking through some of the tension. "I could say the same about you," I said, my hands finding the hem of his sweatshirt. He hesitated for a brief second, then nodded, his arms rising to help me remove the soft fabric. Beneath it, he wore a simple tank top, but the way it clung to his frame left me momentarily breathless. He caught my gaze, his cheeks coloring slightly, but he didn't shy away. "You're staring," he teased, his lips quirking up in a playful smile. "Can you blame me?" I countered, my voice low. The weight of his words hit me, grounding me in the moment. "Why?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. His eyes held mine, unwavering and intense. "Because you intrigued me," he said softly. "Because when I pulled you over, there was something about you I couldn't ignore." I swallowed hard, his honesty unraveling the last remnants of my hesitation. I set my mug down beside his, shifting slightly closer to him on the couch. "And now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His lips parted, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. "Now," he murmured, his voice low and steady, "I'm still figuring that out." His hand brushed against mine, tentative but deliberate, and a shiver ran through me at the contact. Slowly, I turned my hand over, letting my fingers brush against his before lacing them together. The simple gesture felt like a spark igniting something bigger, something I couldn't contain even if I wanted to. His gaze flicked to our joined hands before meeting mine again, his expression charged with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "This is crazy," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice, only a quiet wonder that mirrored my own. "Maybe," I replied, my thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand, "but it doesn't feel wrong." He had a small, hesitant smile on his face, and for a moment, I thought he might pull away. Instead, he leaned in closer, his free hand coming to rest lightly on my arm. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it sent a wave of heat coursing through me. "Cole," I began, but the rest of my words dissolved as his lips brushed against mine. The kiss was tentative at first, a soft meeting of lips that carried more questions than answers. As the seconds passed, it deepened, the gentle exploration giving way to something more urgent, more consuming. His hand moved to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. I let myself sink into the moment, my hands finding his waist and holding him gently. The world outside his cozy living room faded away, leaving only the quiet hum of my heartbeat and the warmth of his body against mine. Somewhere in the haze of our embrace, he shifted, guiding me back against the cushions of the couch as he leaned over me. His fingers trailed over my skin, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. I couldn't get enough of him, of the way he kissed me, the way he moved with such purpose and intent. "You're incredible," I murmured, my voice barely audible against his lips. He pulled back slightly, his eyes meeting mine. There was a vulnerability in his expression that made my chest ache. "I don't usually do this," he admitted softly, his fingers brushing against my jaw. "Neither do I," I said, my hand resting against his cheek. But I'm glad we're here. His lips curved into a smile, and he leaned down to kiss me again, his body pressing closer to mine. The weight of him, the warmth of his skin against mine, felt like a balm to something I hadn't realized was broken. The moments stretched into one another, a tangle of soft touches and whispered words, each one pulling us deeper into the connection we were building. Cole's kisses trailed along my jaw down to my collarbone, and I let out a soft groan as his hands explored with increasing confidence. The intimacy was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Intense and consuming, yet tender and grounding. It was as if we were peeling away layers of our defenses, exposing parts of ourselves we hadn't shown anyone else. As the night deepened, the boundaries between us blurred, and the vulnerability we shared only made the connection stronger. Cole's hands, his lips, his quiet murmurs of my name, they were all imprinted on my senses, leaving me completely captivated by him. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely seen, completely wanted, and as we lay tangled together on the couch, his head resting on my chest and his fingers tracing idle patterns on my skin, I realized I didn't want this moment to end. Even as we drifted into the quiet comfort of each other's arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would change everything. For a while, neither of us spoke, content to simply exist in the moment. The weight of what had just happened was undeniable, but it wasn't heavy. Instead, it felt freeing, as if we'd stripped away every pretense and found something genuine beneath it all. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, breaking the silence. My voice was low, almost hesitant, as if I were afraid to disturb the fragile peace we'd found. Cole tilted his head to look at me, his lips curving into a small smile. "More than okay," he replied, his voice warm and steady. "I feel alive." His words struck something deep within me. "Me too," I admitted, brushing a strand of hair from his face. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding back until now. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's scary though, isn't it? Letting someone in like this." "It is," I agreed, my fingers tracing the curve of his shoulder. "But it's also worth it." He studied me for a moment, his gaze searching mine. "You're not what I expected," he said softly. I raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile playing on my lips. "What did you expect?" "I don't know," he admitted, his smile widening. "But not this. Not someone who makes me feel like this." His words sent a warmth through me that I couldn't quite explain. I leaned down to press a kiss to his forehead, my lips lingering there for a moment. "You make me feel the same way," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, the firelight casting a soft glow over the room. It felt as if time had slowed, the outside world fading into insignificance. "What happens now?" Cole asked eventually, his voice breaking through my thoughts. He shifted slightly, propping himself up on his elbow to look at me. I hesitated, the weight of his question settling over me. "I don't know," I admitted honestly, "but I don't want this to be a one-time thing." His eyes softened, and he reached out to cup my cheek. "Neither do I," he said, his tone resolute. "But this isn't going to be easy." I nodded, knowing he was right. There was so much to consider, so many potential obstacles in our path, but in that moment, all I cared about was him, his smile, his touch, the way he made me feel like I was finally living instead of just existing. "Whatever it takes," I said firmly, my hand covering his where it rested against my cheek. "We'll figure it out together." Cole's lips curved into a smile, and he leaned down to kiss me again, the gesture slow and deliberate, as if sealing a promise between us. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with determination. "Together," he echoed, his voice steady. "So what do you think of my story? Would you have done the same? Would you have called the number?"